I'll tell you some really simple tricks and tips that could genuinely really change how much progress you make in the gym. No particular order, but I'm going to give you 3. And just trust me. Hanna Öberg is going to show us the leg day. She's also going to tell us what skyrocketed her progress in the gym. But the kicker is this. Instead of listening to what she has to say, potentially agreeing with it, I'm going to roast the workout, give my opinions and my thoughts, and then I'm going to tell you exactly what could well skyrocket your progress in the gym, and it's something that you may not be doing right now, but something you probably should be doing if you want to maximize your gains. The deal is this week. If I tell you something that could enhance your training in any capacity and potentially even skyrocket your progress in the gym, then I would very much appreciate it if you did subscribe to the channel. But again, only if I tell you something you didn't already know or something you hadn't already applied. So starting with the adductor, or the adductor machine I should say. This is a movement that many people will often incorporate as like a first movement or a last movement in their leg day. Do you need to? Absolutely not. Can you? Absolutely. Ultimately, adductor training or direct adductor training, adductors being like the inner thigh muscles, is very much something that is subjective to what you need in your physique and what you need in your goals. If your adductors are holding you back from achieving your goals in any capacity, be that a physical weak point, be that an aesthetic weak point, whatever it may be, then starting with a weak muscle is probably a good thing. When it comes to kind of prioritizing muscle groups for development, instead of doing more volume, it's probably better to first start by prioritizing them earlier in the workout. So if your adductors are weak, bang, adductors first. That being said, if you're doing squat patterns, leg press patterns, anything like that, where you're going through a sufficient range of motion and are really going very low, then your adductors are probably going to get a pretty juicy stimulus doing that, because the adductors are quite a driving force when coming out of the hole, being the bottom of like a squat, for example. When your knees twitch inwards as you come out the squat, that's your adductors doing what they need to do. So you may not need to include them. I haven't trained adductors directly for a long time, and they're doing okay. Then going into a glute kickback variation, I'm kind of in two minds. At the end of the day, it really comes down to priorities. Are her glutes a weakness for her and does she want to prioritize them? Then fair enough, doing a kickback is probably fine. I'd probably favor a hip thrust in that sense if I was going to prioritize the glutes first. But I mean, sure, you can do them first. I typically do like to favor putting like kickback variations, and we'll say lower risk movements towards the end of the workout, but again, it really does depend on the individual. If you're struggling with stability here, one thing you can do is actually rest your resting leg, or resting knee I should say, on a bench, and using that as an additional support and stability to prevent you from wobbling all over the place. At the end of the day, when we look at like building muscle, we want the movement to be as stable as possible. So if you can enhance stability through adding a bench into the mix, then why wouldn't you? Especially as a lot of people may feel a lot of tension in their resting leg here, that could help alleviate that tension when you're doing kickback variations. So a leg extension, I actually quite like starting with a leg extension personally, because my knees are a bit older and a little bit frail. So when I do a leg extension before a squat pattern, it just allows my knees to feel a bit nicer in the movement and not cause me any bother. But a leg extension is one of the movements I would say a lot of people should probably include in their workouts. I've mentioned this so many times before, so I'm not going to repeat it, but we know that the leg extension is one of the few leg movements where the rec fem is actually really sufficiently targeted. If you don't include like a leg extension or a sissy squat, or maybe even like a reverse Nordic potentially, then you're potentially risking not training a muscle of the quads sufficiently, which could lead to developmental problems. It could lead to a greater risk of injury, so many things. So leg extensions are a big yes. So now we're moving on to a hack squat. It's probably one of my favorite squat variations, to be honest, because it's bloody fantastic. Your foot position is going to dictate a couple of things here. If you really want to maximize quad development, you want your feet to be as low as possible, thus encouraging as much knee travel as possible. Hannah's feet, arguably because the platform's quite high, are quite high up, and you see her knees don't really travel beyond her toes, and that's kind of what we're looking for when looking at quads. When the knees actually start traveling backwards slightly, as they do for Hanna towards the end of the rep, you'll see in a second, knees traveling back ever so slightly at the bottom, that's probably shifting a bit more emphasis over to the adductors, which are muscles we've already favoured by prioritising them at the start of the session. You'll see how Hanna is using a resistance band here, a reverse band we'll say, which is essentially going to make the movement a little bit easier at the bottom and alleviate some tension at the bottom to help you out the hole, and then it will obviously progressively get heavier throughout the movement as the band loses tension. I think reverse banding the hack squat can be great because again you can essentially manipulate the resistance profile of the movement to align with your preferences. I personally don't reverse band the hack squat because right now what I include the hack squat for is essentially as much length and position dominant work as possible. And taking a bit of tension out of the length and position with a reverse band would then reduce how much of a length and position dominant this movement is. Not by a lot, but by a tiny bit. And I really want to hammer that length and position. But I think, again, it depends on the hack squat you're using. It depends on your goals. But I do think a reverse band can be fantastic if used correctly. If you are using a reverse band that is so thick and strong, it allows you to load up many more plates either side. You're ego lifting, you're not banding properly. A band should be used to help with a small amount of tension release in certain positions to help out of certain positions of the movement. It should not be used for you to ego lift and add a load more plates on, and thus essentially reducing the effectiveness of the movement. I really like what Hanna's doing here because she's actually reverse banding well, where she's only using a small band and at the top, the band loses tension entirely. I think that's bloody good. So now we shift over to the leg press. It looks like this is more of a high narrow stance, but actually bias a bit more of the glutes here because again, it's limiting how much the knees are moving and actually maximizing how much the hips and the glutes are lengthening. So again, a high narrow stance is gonna be pretty good for a glute bias leg press. A low narrow stance might be better for a quad bias leg press due to obviously the additional knee flexion you might experience. Hanna's doing something really well here, where she isn't actually going too low. When you're looking at going through a glute bias leg press, I actually favor going to about Hanna's depth here. So about 90 degrees, maybe a hair beyond, because again, we're looking at how lengthened the glutes are during that movement, and that's kind of where that peaks. If you were going for a quad bias leg press, I'd say go as low as you possibly can and essentially milk as much knee flexion, so knee bend, as possible. Very quickly, 2 seconds at a time, I'm going to say, if you're interested in being coached by me, interested in joining the group coaching, in which you can follow a workout program for either at home or at the gym for less than $1 a day, or interested in any of the TFNL workout guides, have a look in the description because they're all linked down there. The thing here is when you're doing a split squat, although it's unilateral, which means one side at a time, which I respect, I think unilateral work can be fantastic depending on what you're trying to achieve. It's kind of doing the same things we've just already done. You're targeting the glutes in their lengthened position and the quads in their mid position here. Just like with the leg press, glutes in the lengthened, quads in the mid. The issue with that is you'd consider something called exercise redundancy, where you do two movements that essentially achieve the same thing or target the same area in the same position. So glutes lengthened, quads mid, boom, boom, boom. You probably don't need to do both of them. I would say if you want a unilateral movement, I would actually just swap the leg press to a unilateral leg press. So you've kind of hit two birds, one stone there. But what I will acknowledge is the fact that this is probably the least stable movement we've done thus far, and Hanna's chucked it into the end of the workout. And for me personally, I favor doing less stable movements later on. We don't want stability to be a limiting factor when it comes to how hard we can push and how much stimulus our muscles can achieve. When you do a stability demanding movement earlier on, it may hold you back. When you do it later on, when your muscles are already fatigued, it may just close the gap of how much stability may limit the effectiveness of that movement for building muscle. And you'll see here, Hanna's leaning forward slightly and she's got a flat front foot, which would indicate more of a glute bias split squat, whereas if the front foot, or I should say the front heel, were to be elevated and she were to be more upright, that would encourage more knee flexion and knee travel, thus make it slightly more quad bias. So you can alter the movement accordingly depending on what you're wishing to target, or greater bias, we'll say. So that's the workout. And the one thing I would say there is there's no direct hamstring work. I'm not sure if this was a quad and glute workout, or I believe she, or used to, I don't know if she still does, train lower body 3 times a week, so that would make sense. But if you're looking for more of a well-rounded leg workout, I would definitely consider implementing a hip hinge pattern, so like an RDL, and a leg curl pattern, like a line leg curl or something along those lines. Then you're absolutely nailing the hamstrings as well. Probably a bit too much volume for my liking. That actually kind of comes into the title of the video, or the title of her video, I should say, which comes to skyrocketing progress. I'll tell you some really simple tricks and tips that could genuinely really change how much progress you make in the gym. No particular order, but I'm going to give you 3. And just trust me, train harder. One thing many people do is they think they're training a lot harder than they actually are, when in reality, their perception of intensity and difficulty is very skewed. That's very normal. We want to train to, if not close to failure. I favor, in like a green zone, we'll say, about 0 to 2 reps in reserve, depending. Do that paired with progressive overload, so more weight or more reps as frequently as you can, which may not be every week, it may be every few weeks perhaps. You're bloody laughing. Number 2, probably do less volume. Hanna did quite a lot of volume here. My leg day consists of 5 movements, and that includes training calves. Most of them have 2 sets. One might include 1 set, one might include 3 sets, but most of them are about 2 sets. You do not need to do a lot of volume to grow. Intensity is going to be far more important than volume. Additional volume does not mean additional growth. Additional volume may actually result in additional fatigue, which you can't recover from, which will then in turn hinder growth. Train harder, maybe consider doing less volume. And another one, a big one, is rest for longer. A lot of people have this idea that they should rest for about 60 seconds between sets, and I say, riddle me this and why. A lot of the research indicates that you probably want to rest, ideally, for longer than that. I, when looking at really trying to maximize the benefit and stimulus of my workouts, will rest for about 3 to 5 minutes per set. Because if you're training hard enough, you're probably going to need near enough that to recover properly. And if you jump into your set before you've fully recovered, all you're doing is limiting how stimulating that set is going to be for growth. I dare you just to try training harder, just to try doing a bit less volume, and just to try resting a bit longer between sets. Try that for a little while and tell me what happens. And if it goes well, I'll give you some more tips that can help skyrocket your progress. If it doesn't go well, then I don't even know why you subscribe to me. I've failed you. But again, just like all my videos, these are simply my opinions, and I'd love to hear yours in the comment section below. So I'm going to ask you, what's the one thing you've done which enhanced your progress the most? So let me know in the comment section, as I love to hear it. But until the next one, thank you for tolerating me. Thank you for tolerating my waffle about leg day, and thank you for tolerating the video.